think it's time to address the elephant in the room. I love this Thursday series because we get to explore the tidbits of knowledge about the scripture and around the scripture to help us complete our understanding of the scripture. Now, for this past month, we've been in a mini-series on this channel where we've read one chapter of the book of Proverbs every single day. Be sure to check out this video. It will be linked below to get a better idea of what we've been doing, and it's not too late to get in on it. Now, let me know in the comments, what has been your favorite proverb of the whole month so far? I'd love to see a huge list down below, so please, please, please help me get that conversation started. Now, in the second video of this mini-series, The Wise, which will also be linked below, we talked about how Solomon was given wisdom beyond his experience by God so that he could rule God's people well. Solomon wrote down this wisdom, and that's the majority of the Proverbs that we've read this month. But here's the thing, that's how Solomon started, but that's not the whole story. The beginning of his story was impressive. He ruled with wisdom, so much so that foreign dignitaries came from all over just to hear from him. He built a magnificent temple. He greatly strengthened Israel's defense force, and God gave him peace from all surrounding kingdoms. Then we see in 1 Kings 11, Solomon's unchecked weakness that brings everything down. It says, "Now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them, for they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord his God, as his father David had been." Now, this chapter goes on to list all the pagan shrines that Solomon built just to please his wives. This, understandably, made God very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. God goes on to tell Solomon that the kingdom will be torn, but not from outside threats, from the inside. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. How can such a wise man turn his back on God and become such an utter fool? I used to wonder how this could happen. How could such a wise person who had done so much for God, he literally built the temple, fall so far? Well, sadly, I've seen many formerly godly people slowly turn their back on what they know to be wise, true, and right, all to chase things that are wrong, sinful, and foolish. I've seen men abandon their families to chase women who aren't half of what their wife is. I've seen leaders who've had so much potential throw it all down the drain for some quick gains. I've seen people shipwreck their life because of fleeting passions, only to spend the rest of their life in bitter regret. And I'll bet if you've lived long enough, you've seen this too. So how does this happen? Well, first, I think it's a slow fade. Solomon's heart didn't flip like a light switch from worshiping God to worshiping foreign gods in just one moment. Our hearts aren't like that. They're more like dimmer switches. They move incrementally, millimeter by millimeter, slowly changing the direction of our life. If you notice in verse 1, Solomon didn't start by worshiping pagan gods or building shrines to them. He loved many foreign women. It was a slow fade, an incremental creep. So I have a thing for women. I'm the king. I can afford it. Then a little time passes. I don't see any consequences, though I'm explicitly breaking God's commands. I'm the king. I think I'll keep going. Add a few more women to the mix. A little more time passes. I got quite the collection here. Oh, you miss your homeland? Well, what can I do for you, baby? Build a shrine to your God? Hey, if it makes you happy. A little more time passes. More shrines are built to make more women happy. Oh, you want me to worship with you at the shrine? I guess so. I want to keep you happy so that you keep me happy. Are you seeing how this can happen? Small, seemingly insignificant choices put us on a path to compromise, regret, and destruction. How does a person cheat on their spouse? By starting to DM that person from high school who's giving them a little attention. How does large-scale embezzlement happen? By taking just a little bit out of the coffers to pay for something. You're going to put it back and no one's even going to notice. Now, I could go on and on with examples, but I think you get the point. Standing in New York City, Los Angeles seems like a long way away. But if you start taking small step after small step after small step, eventually you're going to look up and see the Welcome to California sign. If you don't want to ruin your life, don't take that first compromising step. To help you put Solomon's life in order, his days of living in wisdom were pretty early in his life. 1 Kings 4:32 tells us that most of his works were written before the temple was complete. He composed some 3,000 proverbs and wrote 1,005 songs. These would become the book of Proverbs and the Song of Solomon. The temple isn't complete until 1 Kings 7. Of course, his fall begins in 1 Kings 11. Solomon would have been wise to remember his own advice in Proverbs 4:32. Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. So why didn't he remember his own wisdom? I think it goes back to the definition of a fool. Fools aren't ignorant of wisdom. They have the life experience that it takes to be wise. Fools are those who choose to go their own way despite knowing the consequences. Fools buy into the same lie that Eve bought into way back in the Garden of Eden, that God is holding out on you, that there's a lot of life to live and a lot of pleasure to be had outside of God's path. And just like Eve, Solomon had to eat the bitter fruit of living his own way. So how did Solomon's life end? Solomon wrote one more book before his death, the book of Ecclesiastes. And when you read it, you'll notice it's very different in tone from the optimistic and helpful book of Proverbs and the young and in love Song of Solomon. The tone of Ecclesiastes is bitter, regretful, and downright depressing. It's a writing of a man who's literally chased everything that life has to offer: sex and money and property and fame and accomplishment and pleasure and power and knowledge, only to come up still needing something more. Here are the final two sentences that Solomon has recorded in the Bible, and I want to make sure that you hear them in light of everything that you have learned today. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands, for this is everyone's duty. God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. Does that not sound like a man who has come to the realization that all the pain in his life could have been avoided if he had only stayed in the guardrails of God's command? Solomon's life serves as a warning to us. No matter where we are now, we can become ensnared in sin and wreck our lives. Wisdom shouldn't make us arrogant. I'll never be as foolish as that. Wisdom should humble us. I must be careful, or that could be me too. In the end, Solomon came back to God, and we rejoice that God offers forgiveness and grace to Solomon even in the darkest moments of Solomon's life. But how much pain could have been avoided if Solomon would have humbly walked in the wisdom that God gave him? So what does that mean for us? We must guard our heart and watch our steps. The 2,794-mile journey from New York to Los Angeles begins with just one step in that direction. So guard your heart. Before we end, I want to share something about Billy Graham that really rocked me to my core. In the year before his death, many pastors met with Billy Graham to have a final conversation with that legendary evangelist. In every account I've heard about these meetings, these visiting pastors would ask Billy Graham how they could pray for him. And his answer wasn't for healing or for a longer life. His answer was always this: pray I finish my race well. Pray I finish my race well? You're Billy Graham. If anyone will be finishing their race well, it will be you, Billy Graham. That's when it hit me. That's humility. That's a man who wants to please God and understands that we are all at the risk of falling into traps. If Billy Graham wants prayer so that he can finish his race well, I certainly need that prayer too. And I think you do as well. Hey, I hope you gained some wisdom from this video. If you did, would you please consider sharing it? And be sure to subscribe so that you can catch the next one when it drops on Thursday. Now, before we go, I want to tell you a little bit about channel sponsor Lifeword. Lifeword has been using technology to broadcast the good news of Jesus all around the world since the 60s. That's a long time ago. And they have production centers here in the United States, in the Philippines, in Ghana, Honduras, and Guatemala. You need to check out what they have going on. So head over to lifeword.org to find out more and to support their mission. We'll see you next time. Grace and peace.